What is going on, everyone? Welcome back to Spill the Tea. Today, I kind of wanted to talk about something that a lot of people start to experience in relationships, but they don't always have the language for it. And that is the anxious and avoidant dynamics, and what's actually happening underneath both individuals. And I just want to quickly note this before anyone actually watches it. This is not about blaming anyone. This is not about diagnosing any kind of people or any kind of problems, and it's definitely not about any kind of relationship drama. This is about bringing a level of self-awareness around the patterns and what those patterns look like when they quietly start running. How you respond and react, especially with inside relationships. Some people in life, they have to grow up having to be very alert at an early age. They have to learn how to notice mood swings, read the rooms. They anticipate that level of conflict. And so they always have to stay ready or stay quiet to keep things from, escalating, from getting worse. And when that starts to happen, protection starts being a part of their behavior pattern. And eventually it becomes a part of their identity. And that identity doesn't, disappear when you become an adult. It doesn't just go away. It just kind of waits for, certain moments to come back online inside that person. And what this starts to look like between two people. So let me try to slow this down to make this a little bit more concrete for you. If you can picture two people in a relationship, even if you can refer to this in your own relationship, nothing dramatic, just kind of a normal moment. One person comes home, maybe they're already stressed from work, or maybe something happens, and then a small little rift in the relationship starts to happen, a small little fight. Maybe someone's comment lands a little wrong, maybe someone's tone is a little off, or maybe people, get, incredibly overwhelmed when, sudden plans changes. And that level of stress starts to tip over. It tips, if you can picture a scale, it tips in one way. So that stress starts to tip in one way. And one person, maybe their voice gets a little sharper. You can obviously tell that they're getting incredibly irritated, maybe slightly angry or whatever. Or maybe one person starts to shut down. They start spiraling. They start replaying that moment, questioning everything. And also in that moment, maybe they need that level of reassurance right then and there. And the other person, feels that shift instantly. Not just emotionally, but physically. And their body starts to tighten. A lot of their thoughts start racing. And in their mind, they're saying to themselves, okay, well, how can I fix this? What do I say so this doesn't get worse? If I don't handle this right, is this going to spiral even further? So they try to step in. They start to explain, whether it's they explain themselves or they start to explain how the other person may be feeling. They start giving the reassurance. They basically try to calm things down. And at first, this looks like love. It absolutely looks like somebody stepping up to the plate, that they're loving you, they're trying to go above and beyond. But in those moments, and this is the shift that most people don't notice, that moment that, responsibility, quietly starts shifting and changing from supporting somebody to managing their emotions and managing the situation that's going on, something inside of them starts to strain. And this is a hard thing to catch. People who live with, that strong protector pattern, that person that tries to instantly rectify that situation or overcompensate or try to de-escalate, and tries to offer that quick reassurance and over explanations. Because they can start to see patterns quickly and they can start to connect the dots, they understand why something is starting to happen. Excuse me. But insight without shared responsibility eventually it turns into frustration, because now that person is not just holding their emotions to try to self-regulate in the moment, but now they're also holding the emotional process for the other person as well. They're trying to help them hurry up and self-regulate and give them the reassurance and everything that they need. And over time, that's where irritation starts to show up. Nitpicking, starts to show up. It looks as nitpicking, and that's where distance starts to be created in a relationship. And it's not because the two people don't care, it's just because your nervous system is incredibly overloaded. And so as you start to mature and grow inside yourself, a lot of it can start to look like you're pulling back. And that's a big shift that, also doesn't get talked about well enough either. Growth and maturity doesn't always look like stepping in harder and trying to regulate that person while regulating yourself, and being more emotionally aware, not only for yourself but also for the other person. So when you start to mature and grow, it doesn't look like you're trying to step in as much. You're allowing that space and stuff. And so sometimes that may look like, that person may not be trying to go to war with your emotions. And that's not because, you're weak or because you don't love somebody. It's just because you finally recognize that cost of carrying everything, that boundaries are not punishment. They're preventing you from reaching that level of resentment, frustration, anger, backlash, and everything like that. So they exist so that way that level of resentment doesn't replace what you have, that connection within the relationship. And oftentimes when that person needs space, it often becomes misunderstood. One of the healthiest dynamics I have seen is when, one person's emotions spike and one person says, I'm taking this the wrong way and I need space to calm down. That sentence right there does something incredibly powerful. It tells the other partner, listen, you're not responsible for regulating me. I'm feeling upset and maybe I'm taking it the wrong way, but I need space so that way I can come back to this conversation later and eventually we can talk about it. And that's not abandoning the relationship, that's just called emotional responsibility. But there is a different perspective now. And that's where a lot of people don't actually talk about, and they don't dive into it. This is where you start hearing people labeling things as avoidant and anxious attachment. And that's where this starts to come in. When someone hears I need space, it can land very differently for that person. Their mind starts to fill the gaps. Why are they leaving me? Did I mess this relationship up? Can't we just talk about this right now? And it's not that because they're trying to cross a boundary, they're trying to feel safe again because they haven't learned self-regulation. And a lot of people hear this dynamic and immediately label it. Again, this is where anxious relationships or avoidant relationships, or the anxious person and the avoidant person continuously attract each other. And so they call the entire dynamic a codependent relationship. And while those frameworks can be helpful, because you're actually labeling what's actually going on with the pattern, they're often incomplete. No one can articulate and actually tell people what's truly going on and give them real life examples. Because what's really happening here isn't the pathology. It's a nervous system history. So let's try to clarify some of that. For someone whose nervous system learned, that distance, when somebody needs space, when they need that distance, that meant a level of danger for them. Space doesn't feel neutral, it feels threatening. It's so, reaching isn't a manipulation tactic. It's an attempt to restore that safety that's inside of them. And also for the other person's system who learned that escalation leads to more harm, and that space isn't avoidance, it's regulation. So stepping away isn't an abandoning not only yourself and also not abandoning the relationship, It's trying to learn self-control. And so if you can try to reframe something, and that allows you now to change everything. And these patterns that people go through continuously, especially nowadays that it's now coming more to light, these patterns don't mean that someone is broken or the relationship is broken or these two people are broken. What it means is that there are two different nervous systems that learned different survival strategies. One person learned that I need to stay close to these people because that's where safety is, while the other person learned if I create a little bit of space and a little bit of distance, that helps me stay safe. And problems don't arise because one is anxious and the other one is avoidant. They arise when, those two differences aren't named, understood, or even coordinated. If you can't understand it, then how can you work through it? So, and there is a level of responsibility on both persons without blaming anyone. Understanding this doesn't remove that level of responsibility from that person. It actually adds to it. Because once you know more about yourself and the pattern of you, of how you, operate in the world, you can start to understand and learn how to manage your own responsibility on how to manage it. And a level of awareness is not an excuse. It's just an invitation to do better, to be better, to become better. Healthy space isn't, a silent treatment. It has shape. In healthy relationships, people often call this giving each other space within inside the relationship, not to disconnect, but to regulate. And you'll see, even in social media, you'll see a lot of women talk about this, especially very mature, healthy women, where I can recall one instance where I was watching a TikTok reel, and this woman had mentioned that when she gets into a relationship, she's in for the long haul. And maybe there was something going on in her relationship, and she said, hey, listen, honey, if you need time for yourself, then go take as much time as you need. I'm not going anywhere. You need to, do your thing, learn whatever it is that you need. And that also gave her space too. And so what space may look like in a relationship is maybe one person might walk into another room, taking a walk, or maybe for a couple of days, they're still living together, but maybe for a couple of days, that gentleman is doing his own thing for a couple of days, and maybe that woman is doing a couple things, by herself for a couple of days. If you're not living together and you're in the beginning stages of a relationship, and this starts to show up, 6, 7, 8 months early in a relationship, because this is where you start to actually truly start to get to know someone before you, hit that 1 year mark, and you're not living together, it may look like taking a day to yourself or even a couple of days. And I'm not saying completely avoid them. Every now and again you can shoot them a text, let them know that you're thinking of them, but it's just taking that space. It's, and what that space does is it helps you pause, it helps you relax, it helps you unwind, it helps you calm your nervous system down and settle your nervous system. And one key frame is you don't want to avoid the conversation or the fight that's going on. By taking the space, it's actually helping you create clarity. Instead of when you do address the situation again, you don't try to take charge, you have more clarity to move forward with it. Because the key is not distance from the problem. The key is recognizing that neither of you are the problem, but there is a problem, and both of you guys are on the same team, and you guys are on the same side trying to understand the problem. And once you start making that shift, it starts to change everything. Because now space is not about separation. It's about creating enough space for regulation to actually solve what is in front of you. And the more that you can apply these techniques in life, the more that you can apply it when you guys are living together. So, what looks like anger most often is often just a protectiveness and it just has nowhere to go. And what looks like start to be nitpicking in a relationship is mainly just more unspoken feelings of how that person is feeling overwhelmed. And what looks like, creating distance or space is often the restraint. Because especially for myself as a man with PTSD, you don't have to go to war to be strong. And certainly as a man, you don't want to go to war with the woman that you are with. You are willing to go to war for her, but you're not going to go to war with her, especially her emotions. Even a man's emotions. You know what I mean? Love doesn't mean carrying someone else's emotions. It just means trusting them enough to carry their own while you carry yours. And that's not less love, that's the start and the beginning of mature love, a healthy dynamic within a good relationship. But before anyone goes, I do want to ask you guys something. And, there's no right or wrong answer. When conflict starts to show up in your relationship, do you guys tend to reach for closeness, or do you guys need space at first? When someone asks for space, does your body feel slightly calmer, or does it feel like something is being taken away from you? And I'm not asking you guys so that way you guys can be labeled, or so I can label you. I'm asking because understanding how your nervous system responds is often the first step towards changing that pattern inside of you without blaming yourself or anyone else. And so I'm hoping that this video put a level of language to something that you have been feeling or have felt about but couldn't truly explain it. Please let me know in the comments, and you don't have to overshare. Even something simple like, hey, this helped me, or this kind of sounds familiar, all of that helps. All of that matters. And if you've been watching this for a while but you're not subscribed yet, this channel is for conversations like this. It's not made for drama, it's not made to pick sides, it's just there to show and bring awareness of patterns and also be able to explain it in a way that actually helps people. And I'm hoping that if you guys want to keep learning, without being judged, hit subscribe. And I'm glad you're here, and I hope to see you guys in the next episode of Spill the Tea. Thanks, guys. Have a great day.